Do you remember the golden age of television when millions gathered around their screens to watch Johnny Carson? When Hollywood's most dazzling stars graced that famous couch, their perfect smiles hiding secrets that would shake America to its core. Tonight, we're pulling back the velvet curtain on 7 men whose lies weren't just about protecting themselves. They were masterfully constructed deceptions that turned an entire nation into willing accomplices. These weren't victims of their time. They were architects of elaborate frauds who manipulated public trust for profit, using women as props and lovers as ghosts. What you're about to discover will forever change how you see those classic Tonight Show moments. Because the real performance wasn't happening on stage, it was happening in the shadows, where truth went to die. Rock Hudson stood as America's definition of masculinity, towering at 6'5", with shoulders that seemed carved from granite, and a voice that could melt hearts across the nation. Every Tonight Show appearance sent ratings soaring as women screamed and men envied this titan of manhood. But backstage, a very different scene unfolded. Hudson's dressing room resembled a war room more than a star sanctuary. Crisis managers huddled around him, not discussing scripts but strategizing which starlet he needed to be photographed with that week, which restaurant paparazzi should accidentally catch him at. Women weren't romantic interests to Hudson. They were strategic weapons in his arsenal of deception, flesh and blood shields protecting the empire his heterosexual image had built. His marriage to Phyllis Gates epitomized this calculated cruelty. Johnny Carson congratulated him on air, calling it Hollywood's fairy tale ending. The reality was a business transaction orchestrated by his agent Henry Wilson to silence Confidential magazine's threats of exposure. Hudson dragged Gates through a ceremony before God, played the devoted husband in every publication, knowing he could never offer genuine affection. She wasn't a wife but a living stage prop, sacrificed on the altar of his career. When the charade served its purpose and rumors quieted, he discarded her without mercy. On Carson's couch, Hudson perfected his performance for decades. When Johnny playfully suggested romances with co-stars, Hudson didn't deflect. He leaned in, winking and creating deliberate ambiguity that fed the audience's fantasies. He understood emotional manipulation like a virtuoso understands music, selling desperate housewives impossible dreams, while living out uninhibited desires at his Beverly Hills estate where masculinity dissolved along with expensive clothing. The reckoning arrived in 1985 not through scandal but through AIDS, that era's death sentence. His final public appearance on Doris Day's show revealed a skeletal figure with haunted eyes, shocking a world that had worshipped his vitality. But what disgusted people more than his sexuality was the deception maintained until his last breath. He kissed Linda Evans on Dynasty, knowing he carried the disease when transmission mechanisms remained poorly understood, terrorizing his co-star. He wielded money and power to purchase ex-lovers' silence, transforming his existence into an elaborate fabrication. Hudson's death didn't leave behind romantic films but the rubble of a fraudulent monument, and Carson, who valued authenticity, likely realized he'd been manipulated into becoming a puppet in Hudson's grand performance. Raymond Burr took deception to unprecedented depths, crafting lies so tragic that questioning them seemed inhuman. The biographical sheets sent to Carson's desk before each appearance contained devastating lines drafted by Burr and his team. Wife Annette Sutherland died 1943. Son Michael Evan died 1953. These weren't memories but manufactured shields. While Carson prepared show scripts, Burr lived his actual life in a Hollywood Hills home with Robert Benavides, a younger actor he'd met on the Perry Mason set and loved deeply. Benavides wasn't staff or roommate but life partner, sharing Burr's bed and every burden. They existed as a genuinely happy couple until phones rang or visitors arrived, forcing Benavides to vanish into shadows, becoming a ghost in his own home. Burr's cruelty manifested in this erasure. To protect their relationship from scrutiny while maintaining his television hero image, he chose to murder truth and replace it with phantoms. Understanding that a wealthy middle-aged bachelor would face sexuality questions, he invented a narrative so heartbreaking that doubt seemed monstrous. He fabricated Annette Sutherland, a non-existent British actress, placing her death on the real flight carrying actor Leslie Howard, shot down by Nazis. Not sufficiently tragic, he created son Michael, detailing the child's agonizing leukemia death at age 10. The audacity staggers the imagination. Sitting in the Tonight Show green room, Burr let Carson and producers absorb this tear-soaked biography, knowing Johnny, ever the gentleman, would regard him with eyes full of sympathy for a father who lost everything. Johnny would never ask about remarriage because the answer seemed obvious, too wounded by the past. Burr didn't need theatrical tears on air, just silence while carrying his widower identity onto that stage. He received audience reverence and condolence letters from housewives nationwide while actually living contentedly with Benavides, transforming his real lover into a public nonentity, replaced by imaginary corpses. This fiction endured so long it calcified into accepted truth. Benavides, who deserved recognition, accepted shadow existence for 35 years, watching his partner portray television's loneliest man. Burr even invented a second wife dying of cancer to reinforce his cover, despising truth so thoroughly he weaponized death and disease for public relations. Only Burr's 1993 death lowered the curtain. Benavides finally stepped into light, acknowledging their relationship and exposing the Annette and Michael fabrications. Hollywood reeled. Carson likely realized he'd been spectacularly deceived. Burr wasn't fate's victim but director of the century's most fraudulent private life performance, proving that for fame's sake, a man will kill people never born and bury his most beloved in silence's darkness. Liberace's relationship with Carson represented 70s television's strangest balancing act. If Johnny embodied the standard poised gentleman in dark suits, Liberace exploded with color and frivolity. Each appearance transformed the studio into a royal spectacle. Carson, with tolerant amusement, indulged Liberace's flamboyance, never mocking but enabling the shine of harmless showmanship. On that legendary couch, Liberace sat with crossed legs, diamond-ringed hands waving theatrically, discussing his mother, expensive antiques, and constantly reinforcing the image of a romantic seeking his perfect wife. Carson would squint knowingly, asking when wealth would lead to settling down. Liberace's tinkling laugh preceded saccharine words about his ideal woman delivered straight into lenses where millions watched. Carson felt satisfied, believing he delivered fairy tale dreams of wealth and devotion. But away from Burbank's applause and warm lights existed much colder spaces. In a Hollywood cosmetic surgeon's post-op room, in 1979, the patient wasn't a woman clinging to youth but Scott Thorson, barely 20, once Liberace's driver and now secret lover. Scott lay delirious in throbbing pain, face wrapped tight with only swollen eyes and nostrils visible. The room reeked of antiseptic and faint blood. Sitting bedside wasn't a concerned relative but Liberace, not offering tender care but admiring like an artisan viewing his sculpture. In the haunting memoir Behind the Candelabra, Thorson recounted Liberace's most bizarre demand imaginable. He wanted Scott surgically altered to become a young Liberace replica. The twisted psychology staggers belief. Liberace didn't love Scott for his identity but loved himself pathologically, wanting his own face on his young lover's body. He hired top surgeon Jack Startz, paying to chisel Scott's chin, reshape his nose, implant cheeks until the young man completely lost his birth identity. When bandages came off, Scott confronted a stranger in the mirror, seeing Liberace's signature features, artificial cleft chin. He panicked, wanting to scream, but Liberace stood behind, ring-laden hands on shoulders, smiling with satisfaction, declaring perfection, ownership forever. Liberace's glamour was a solid gold cage. In the lavish Las Vegas penthouse, he controlled Scott like a living doll, forcing identical outfits, diet pills actually mixed with drugs for fitness maintenance, serving bizarre sexual preferences. Thorson transformed from healthy innocent boy into lost addict living in paranoia from thorough psychological manipulation. Resistance met soft power, expensive gifts, threats of street abandonment, and worst of all, cold silence, wielded more skillfully than piano keys. Most terrifying was Liberace's perfect compartmentalization. Days after forcing his lover through painful surgery, he reappeared on The Tonight Show in snow-white fur cape weighing 40 pounds, sparkling angelically. He performed a lilting classical piece, then turned to Carson, laughing about artist loneliness. Carson, completely unaware of bedroom Frankenstein horrors, applauded enthusiastically while audiences cheered standing ovations. Liberace bowed, radiant smile concealing horrific truth, having just stripped a young boy's face and soul to satisfy megalomaniacal ego. The pinnacle arrived in 1982 when exhausted Thorson, discarded like broken toys, filed palimony suit. The world reeled, but Liberace's reaction demonstrated demonic performance mastery. He showed no remorse, appearing in media with watery victim eyes, completely denying homosexual relationships, calling Scott a dirty blackmailer, disgruntled employee fabricating stories. Liberace deployed lawyer armies and money to crush the young man, forcing cheap settlement silence. His audacity extended to his deathbed, dying of AIDS in 1987 while continuing deception, forcing doctors to record heart failure as cause of death, preserving clean image to the final minute. Carson, who prided himself on seeing through people, was painfully duped for decades. The glamour, ridiculous outfits, teasing jokes weren't artistic personality but thick camouflage for a narcissistic predator willing to carve others' flesh and bone to mold monuments to himself. Tab Hunter and Carson shared characteristic 50s and 60s complicity as lady killers. Hunter possessed America's worship beauty, golden hair, innocent blue eyes, surfer muscles, blindingly white smile. He was the model all-American boy. Female studio audience members screamed with delight, believing Tab was their bachelor prince seeking a princess, perhaps them. Carson nodded approvingly, conversing with what seemed Hollywood's true Casanova. But Carson and America remained ignorant that when cameras stopped, Hunter's smile extinguished like unplugged light bulbs. He wasn't a lover but a prisoner. Behind famous Romanoff's restaurant in Beverly Hills on a 1956 Saturday night, a shiny convertible arrived. Tab Hunter and Natalie Wood emerged under blinding reporter flashes, appearing as heaven's golden couple. Tab wrapped arms around Natalie's waist. Natalie gazed adoringly upward. They laughed, whispered, posed for magazine covers. The scene radiated breathtaking romance, but naked truth unfolded inside the closed car, separated from crowds. The atmosphere turned silent as graves, heavy and stifling. Hunter released Natalie's hand immediately, as if touching hot objects, exhaling sharply, leaning exhausted on the steering wheel. Natalie, under similar pressure, lit cigarettes, saying wearily that Henry confirmed 20 minutes made papers, asking for home rides, exhausted. This wasn't dating but shift work. Hunter was product molded by notorious manager Henry Wilson, who specialized in whitewashing gay actors. Henry knew Tab's sexuality, Warner Brothers knew, but they cared about box office revenue, not authentic identity. They designed fake romance production lines. This week dining with Natalie Wood, next week Debbie Reynolds. Tab's mission involved smiling, hand-holding, playing dream lover. This charade's dirt lay in human rights deprivation. Hunter was absolutely forbidden real feelings, living in constant fear named confidential, the tabloid blackmailing stars with exposure threats. One horrific night haunted Hunter eternally when caught at all-male pajama parties raided by police. To save the boy next door career, studios executed cruel transactions, selling out lesser-known actors to press in exchange for Tab's silence. Hunter kept his halo but paid by continuing lies, deceiving audiences daily. While Carson teased about beautiful girlfriends, Tab's heart directed elsewhere. He maintained secret, painful relationships with Anthony Perkins. Imagine heartbreaking irony. Hunter and Perkins, two of Hollywood's biggest male idols, loved each other but met like thieves, wearing dark glasses, pulling hats low, secretly meeting in supermarket aisles or midnight deserted beaches. They dared not hold hands, dared not look too long. Every Tonight Show appearance discussing ideal girlfriends committed betrayal against his beloved. He denied Perkins's existence, denied his own ego, selling audiences fake products of perfect heterosexual love. Carson perhaps vaguely sensed something unnatural in Tab's smooth answers, but was part of that system needing glittering stars for viewers. Hunter became the brightest star. Johnny inadvertently enabled the lying machine's smooth operation, turning Hunter into artificiality's symbol representing entertainment industry cruelty, where truth was cheapest and lying television smiles valued higher than lifetime happiness. When The Tonight Show band played Psycho's shrill, haunting tune, studio audiences shuddered, then applauded. Emerging wasn't a knife-wielding murderer, but Anthony Perkins, thin and lanky with scholarly face and adorably confused, shy demeanor. Carson loved exploiting this contrast, pretending wariness, asking if Tony hid skeletons in closets. Anthony would bow his head, flash embarrassed smiles, hands twisting together, denying everything, claiming boring guy status who stayed home reading and playing with kids. Audiences roared delightedly, loving how Perkins shed murderer images to become family man, devoted husband to photographer Barry Berenson. On air, Anthony built images of men healed by love, overcoming role obsessions to find simple happiness. But Carson and millions were deceived by that very innocence. Truth revealed Anthony never broke character. He was Norman Bates in real life, living with two completely separate personalities, and that happy marriage was merely thick velvet curtains erected to blind the world. In secret New York therapy sessions during late 60s, Anthony wasn't a star but desperate patient. In dim rooms, he sat huddled on chairs, sweating profusely, making desperate self-brainwashing attempts. Anthony loathed himself, loathed homosexual desires burning his body nightly. He'd been madly in love with Tab Hunter, had secret affairs with dancer Grover Dale, but society and Hollywood pressure made him view it as cancer needing excision. Perkins's story's dirt lay in exploiting women to cure illness in 1973. At 41, Anthony suddenly married Barry Berenson, beautiful young woman, and actress Marissa Berenson's sister. On Carson's show, Anthony recounted this marriage as romantic destiny, but reality was sedative usage. Anthony believed marriage, children, playing model husband would kill the gay demon inside. He used Barry as sacrifice, life buoy to cling to so-called normality. Once during photo shoots with his wife, he hugged her, held babies, smiled radiantly. Photographers shouted about perfect families. But when cameras lowered, Anthony's eyes became empty, having just finished acting scenes. By night in that happy house, Anthony still secretly sneaked out seeking seedy adult cinemas, filthy public bathhouses to satisfy unsuppressible desires, then returned home climbing into bed next to sleeping wives carrying betrayal and lies smell. Perkins deceived Carson most sophisticatedly through fake sincerity. When Johnny asked about family, emotion in Anthony's voice was real, but not from happiness, but fear. He clung to family images like drowning men to logs. The tragedy ended in 1992 when Perkins died from AIDS complications. Until final days, he and his wife tried keeping cause of death secret, releasing pneumonia death statements, final efforts protecting 20-year plays. Carson, hearing news, perhaps shuddered recalling Anthony interviews, realizing shyness and confusion in hot seats weren't innate charm, but manifestations of men walking tightropes, always terrified winds would blow off masks. Perkins appears on this list because he embodies the most tragic lies, men turning wives and children into living props to play real men, while souls rotted long ago in inescapable torment in Carson's and millions of old-school American men's minds. Randolph Scott embodied absolute masculinity, the Western cowboy with rock-chiseled face, eyes narrowing under Stetson brims, men of few words always drawing guns faster than shadows. On silver screens, Scott never needed women, only horses and guns. That image became so strong it transformed into moral standards where men must be tough, solitary, and steely. But ironic truth existed that Carson, keeper of all Hollywood rumors, knew well but rarely dared say outright on air. The lonely cowboy actually wasn't lonely at all. He had unofficial wives for 12 years, and that wife was Cary Grant, world cinema's #1 elegant gentleman. In Santa Monica beachfront mansions during golden years, people called it Bachelor Hall, where Scott and Grant lived together openly. Movie magazines like Modern Screen or Photoplay were frequently invited for photos that look back with today's eyes are truly shocking for obviousness. Scott, the rugged cowboy, wearing aprons cooking dinner while Grant sat nearby smiling affectionately watching soup tastings, or scenes of two muscular men in swim trunks playfully splashing water at private pools or doing aerobics together on lawns. The dirt and ridiculousness didn't lie in their love. That was beautiful, but in explanations they threw in audiences' faces. When reporters asked why two of the world's richest movie stars earning millions per film lived together in such cramped houses, Scott answered with straight faces about saving living expenses due to tough economic times. That was lies insulting listeners' intellect to laughable degrees. But Hollywood was complicit. Paramount studio moguls, fearing loss of these cash cows, wove legends about pure male friendship, turning Scott and Grant into sex symbols for women knowing full well these men were only interested in each other. The charade peaked when public pressure became too great and studios forced marriages to quell rumors. A series of arranged marriages was born, with Grant hastily marrying Virginia Cherrill while Scott married heiress Marion DuPont. But audacity lay in this. Even after marrying, they still found ways to return to each other. Period. Still secretly living at Bachelor Hall, abandoning legal wives lonely in other houses. Those women, Virginia and Marion, became pitiable victims turned into screens covering Hollywood's biggest same-sex affair. Carson, mentioning bachelors like Scott, often had meaningful half-smiles, knowing the cowboy image Scott painstakingly built was just costume. Scott wasn't. Loner but two-faced liver, using silence and austerity of cowboy roles to refuse interviews and talking about private life. Finally, curtains fell when Scott decided to retire early, withdrawing completely into shadows, taking secrets to graves, leaving Hollywood contradictory legacies as greatest masculinity symbols built on foundations of greatest gender lies. In the 60s and especially 80s with Thornbird's series, Richard Chamberlain was the name making millions of women's hearts stop beating, possessing Greek statue beauty, blonde hair, blue eyes, noble high cheekbones, and polite aristocratic demeanor. When Richard walked onto Tonight Show stages, female audience screams were so loud Carson had to raise hands signaling for order. Chamberlain would sit with straight backs, restrained smiles, delivering answers rehearsed thousands of times about looking for soul connections, too busy with work to care for worthy women. That was perfect answers, humble, romantic, keeping hope alive for female fans. But Carson and the whole world were deceived by flawless exteriors. Truth was, Chamberlain wasn't looking for any women at all. He was running away, fearing exposure to paranoia states. On Oahu Island, Hawaii, where Chamberlain exiled himself in late 70s, in secluded villas surrounded by tropical forests, Richard lived with young lover Martin Rabbit, loving each other sincerely and deeply. But in eras where homophobia remained heavy, Richard couldn't give Martin titles, couldn't introduce partners, and Richard's biggest fear was if he died, his family or state would strip away all assets, kicking Martin onto streets, because they had no legal relationships. Therefore, Chamberlain performed acts that were tragic, painful, and pinnacles of deceit. To circumvent laws, he filed papers adopting Rabbit, his lover, as his son. Imagine twisted tragedy nature, where on legal papers Richard was father and Martin was son, but in bedrooms they were lovers. Richard had to distort sacred family definitions, turning beloved persons into children, just to protect each other from laws and society's prying eyes. Meanwhile, every Los Angeles returned to join Tonight Show promoting Shogun or Thornbirds. Chamberlain had to put on old masks, sitting opposite Carson again, lying again about ideal women types. The dirt didn't lie in love, but in idle cowardice. He'd rather let whole worlds believe he was picky men. rather act out fake incestuous plays on papers as adoptive fathers and sons than stand tall admitting true identities. Chamberlain sold audiences romantic dreams about Father Ralph torn between God's love and women's love, but in real life was men torn between truth and fame choosing fame, letting Rabbit live in shadows hiding under manager or adopted son titles for decades. Not until 2003 at 69, when careers were in twilight with nothing left to lose, did Chamberlain write memoirs publicly revealing true sexuality, admitting pain and artificiality maintained entire lives. But for many, that confession came too late. Carson, if he'd lived until then, probably felt bitter, realizing Prince Charming, who once sat on sofas, was actually pitiable prisoners. Chamberlain lies at this list's end because he represents most terrible waste, men who had everything including talent, looks, money, but didn't have single days to live bravely under suns while at peaks, proving Hollywood's glamorous glass cages, even if gold-plated, are still cold prisons confining souls that dare not live true. Johnny Carson, television's most powerful man, inadvertently became narrator for these charades, asking them about women, family, happiness, while they answered with prepared scripts, turning lives into fictions to protect assets and reputations. This closes not to judge who they loved, but to show brutal costs of deceit. Those male gods lived in flashy glass cabinets inlaid with gold and diamonds, but inside was emptiness, fear, and ultimate loneliness, deceiving audiences. Deceiving Johnny, and most cruelly deceiving themselves until drawing final breaths. What are your feelings now? Compassion for fates living double lives, or outrage at being deceived for so many years by dignified idols? Share your thoughts, because the truth is always more thrilling than fiction.